Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with chapter 9. I'm going to flip my camera to my whiteboard. And chapter 9 in Gapenski, we're going to be talking about this concept called time value of money, or TVM. You'll hear it referred to as TVM. The time value of money is the idea is that a dollar today is not worth the same thing to you as a dollar a year from now, right? So if I said, can I borrow, Katie, can I borrow $10 from you? And you say, sure. And I say, well, I'll pay you back tomorrow. That's not the same thing as if I said to you, Katie, can I borrow $10 and pay you back next February, right? That's a bigger sacrifice on your part, because if I pay you back tomorrow, you probably be like, yeah, I don't need the money I don't need the money anyway till tomorrow. But if I say, hey, I'm not going to give that to you for a month or a year or 10 years, right? That's not the same thing, right? That's not the same thing as getting the money back tomorrow or later today. And so that's the idea of the time value of money. If I say, hey, I'll borrow $10 from you, but I'll pay you back 10 years from now, like $10 10 years from now is worth like nothing to you, right? And so you may as well just be like, here, Bonica, here's $10, go away, right? And that's because of the time value of money. Right? So a dollar today is not the same thing as a dollar tomorrow, or a year from now, or 10 years from now. And so that's what we're going to be talking about a lot in this, and is the basis of much of this course. So I want to talk a couple of, we're going to get going here. I'm going to talk some definitions. So the first definition you need to know is a lump sum. Lump sum. We're going to use that phrase a lot. I know that sounds like something I just made up, but it's actually a term that's used regularly in finance. And what a lump sum is a single payment. So it is a single payment or a single cash flow. So that's kind of like what I just described. I said to Katie, can I borrow $10? She says, sure. She hands me $10. And I say, I'll pay you back next week. So the lump sum would be Katie's lending me $10. I am then paying her back $10. It's a single transaction, right? So there's a single sum being transferred of $10. The alternative here is an annuity. And an annuity is a stream of payments or stream of cash flows. We'll use that phrase, cash flows and payments, kind of interchangeably. Cash flow is, well, they both have formal meanings, but the idea here is that cash is flowing in and out of your business or in and out of your bank account, depending on how you want to think about it. Okay, so an annuity is, think of like Social Security, right? If you make it to 65, if you're lucky to make it to 65, you win a automatic annuity from the U.S. government for some amount of money, and it's a stream of cash flows. So if you have grandparents, for example, they may be old enough to collect Social Security, so they get a monthly payment from Social Security. So they get, they get a payment. Let's say they're getting $1,000, so they get a payment, a stream of $1,000 cash flows, right? And so this is an annuity. An annuity is a stream of payments, typically most commonly thought of in terms of being fixed, though we'll talk later on about calculating the value of a growing annuity. But for this chapter, we won't get into growing annuities. We will just stick with fixed annuities. So, for example, when I retired from the Army, I get a pension for the rest of my life from the federal government as part of my military retirement. So I get a payment every month from the federal government. So I get an annuity. That annuity is semi-fixed. It's adjusted for inflation, so it's actually technically a growing annuity. So it's going to be a little bit bigger each year. They make an adjustment, and it gets a little bit bigger to allow for inflation. Um, for this for this chapter, we're going to deal with the assumption. We're going to work with the assumption that um, the cash flows are the same in each payment period for an annuity. So it's a fixed payment, fixed stream of payments or fixed stream of cash flows over time. So this is time zero, the present. So then we start getting it in time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Now, an annuity has a specified end date. So in this case, this annuity is a 6-period annuity. You can have an annuity that pays out on a monthly basis. You can have an annuity that pays out on an annual basis. You can have an annuity that pays out on a quarterly basis. You can have an annuity that pays out on a semi-annual basis. We will work with all of those in this course, and I will teach you how to calculate those. Okay, so, and then we can have I guess it's not really a definitional thing, but a uneven cash flows, uneven cash flows. And that is a stream of cash flows uh, that are not fixed. So an uneven cash flow looks something like this. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So instead of getting 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, you might get 3,000, 2,000, 4,000, and 7,000, right? Those are just numbers I'm making up. But the point here is it's not 1, 1, 1, 1, or 2, 2, 2, 2, right? So this is an uneven cash flow. So we will have different ways of dealing with an annuity, a lump sum, or a uneven cash flow. And let me just show you. A lump sum might look like Katie lends me $10 today, and we're going to use 0 times 0 is going to refer to today. So when I say times 0, I'm going to be meaning today. And so times 0, Katie lends me lends me $10 today, and then I pay her back in 6 years the $10. That is a single payment, right? I don't have any intervening payments. So that's a lump sum example. I'm going to do a lot with these timelines because they're helpful to figuring out and understanding um, uh, 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 the financial processes that are happening. Okay, so lump sum, annuity, uh, uh, cash flow, uneven cash flow. So those are some vocabulary that we need. Next vocabulary we need is future value, which I will abbreviate FV, future value. Future value is how much something is worth in the future, hence the value, future value, right? So if instead of, um, so if Katie were instead of lending me $10 was to put $10 in the bank, right? And what we're going to do is represent when money flows out of your account, right? We're going to represent it as a negative number. So we can either put it in parentheses to represent it as negative, or we can make it a negative. So in this case, at time zero, Katie is depositing $10 into an investment. She's investing that money. So it's coming out of her pocket, out of her purse, and going into an investment. That investment is going to earn an interest rate, right? Which is the rate of return on the investment. Um, it is also, we will also refer to it as the price of money. That's a little more sophisticated, and we'll make more sense of that later. But basically, when you take money, you take your cash, right, and you give it to the bank is offering you a payment, right? It is a rate of return. Right now, the bank is paying a ridiculously low rate, like 0.25% or 0.5% or something like that. Um, but that is the price of money, right? That is the price that the bank has to pay in order to get you to give them your money. So we can think of the interest rate, but probably for this chapter, you can think of it as the rate of return on your investment. It becomes relevant when we think about some other things, to think about it as a price of money, but it is both of those things. So if Katie, and we will abbreviate that I for interest rate. We will also occasionally use R for interest rate. So just be careful. You'll see it both ways. I'm going to typically use I, but there may be some circumstances where it shows up as R. So just kind of be aware that it could show up as R as well. But typically we're going to use I um, as the interest rate. So um, so if Katie takes her $10 and puts it in the bank for 5 years, right? Um, what we're talking about is a number of periods, which we're going to abbreviate as N. So N is the number of periods, and the number of periods, N, can be expressed in terms of months, years, days, quarters, semi-annual payments, right, every 6 months. Right? So this is the period of compounding. Uh, so when Katie puts her money in the bank, it's going to earn interest. Now, Katie has said, I'm going to put this in let's say a 5-year CD, right, a certificate of deposit. So those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's an instrument that you can buy typically at your bank, and the difference between a certificate of deposit and just a savings account is you're making a commitment to the bank that they can hold onto your money for 5 years. Now, what that allows the bank to do um, is you understand, or if you don't understand, what you should understand about banks is when you give them your money, um, they don't keep it in the vault. Like they keep just a tiny fraction of their funds of their deposits actually physically in the bank. The rest of the time, that money flows into them, and then they turn around and lend it back out again in the form of car loans, student loans, home loans, business loans, right? So what you're doing is you're giving them money, and then they're turning around and lending that money out to somebody that needs it. Basically, what you're saying is, I don't need this money right now, especially if you'd be willing to pay me and some amount of interest, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my money, and the bank says thank you very much, and they turn around and they lend that money out to people who need the money right now. And so the bank pays you some amount of interest, and then they turn around, and so if Katie takes her money and puts it in the bank, and she says, okay, I'll take that 1/4%. And then Octavia comes in and says, um, I need to buy a new car. The bank says, okay, well, we have money that our depositors have given us. So Katie's given us some money, and Lauren's given us some money, and Cole's given us some money, right? And we've aggregated that all together. And Octavia wants to borrow $10,000 to buy a used car, right? So the bank says, sure, we're paying, Katie and Lauren and Cole 1/4%. We're going to charge you 4%, Octavia, on your loan, and that's how the bank makes its money, right? It's paying the depositors some small amount of interest, and then it's earning a higher rate of interest when it lends to borrowers. And so the difference is how the bank makes its profit. Now, the benefit of something like a 5-year CD to them, as opposed to, say, a checking account or a savings account, is your checking account you can take, and you're probably constantly taking money out to pay your credit cards, or you're Venmoing to your friends or whatever you're doing. Um, and a savings account has some penalties if you take money out too often. Um, and I think there's some rules, like you can only take it out once a month or something like that from a savings account. Um, uh, but a 5-year CD tells the bank, we're going to have this money for 5 years, right? And so we can lend it to Octavia for a year, then it's going to come back, and we can lend it to Skylar for 2 years, and it's going to come back. And we still got 2 more years with Katie's money before we have to give it back to her. And so that's why they pay higher interest rates for CDs than they do for, say, savings accounts. Is with a CD, they've got a more predictable supply of money that they can lend out again. Okay, so those are kind of just some of the, I think, they're important ideas for you to understand, both as a future business leader, but also as a consumer, how this all works, right? And why it works the way it works. So let me show you now. Let's go back to Katie's investment. All right. So if Katie has invested her money, I'm going to start a new sheet, but Katie's investing her $10. Just want to make it a little bit with a little less junk all around. Katie's going to do an investment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Katie is going to earn an interest rate of, let's say, 5%, just to make this easy. She is going to invest for a period of 5 years. N is 5. Okay. Um, One thing we haven't talked about yet was the present value. Sorry, I need to give you one more piece of one more definition. This is the value today, right? At time zero. So at time zero, right? The value today or at time zero. So Katie's present value, and we're going to abbreviate that PV. So Katie's present value of her investment as of today is $10. You know what? Let's ramp it up. We'll make Katie a little wealthier. We'll make it $100 because it'll be easier to do. So we're going to make Katie's investment $100. Okay, so the value that Katie has at time zero is 100. Because she is investing that money at time zero, we're going to express it as a negative. It's a cash flow out for Katie, right? So her cash flow at time zero is negative 100. She's putting that money into an investment. In this case, she's just putting it in the bank. The bank is going to pay her 5%. It's a CD, right? So she's committed to 5 years. She's going to earn 5% interest each year, compounded annually. That's important. So it's going to be compounded annually. What does that mean? Compounding. We're going to demonstrate that. But that is interest on investment is process of compounding is a process of earning interest on your investment. So Katie has a 5-year commitment, but she's going to have annual compounding, right? So she's going to have 5 years of compounding. So she's going to earn 5% interest going from during the first year. So how much is Katie's account worth after the first year if she's earning 5% interest?
Wouldn't it be 105?
It would be 105. Right? And so what we're doing is we said, okay, the value, the future value at year one is going to be $100, the present value, times um, uh, 0.05, right? That's going to be the amount of interest that she earns, plus um, the $100 that she initially had, right? We can simplify that and just say, so that's our PV times our I plus our PV, right? That's the equivalent of having PV times 1. We can pull PV out of this and have PV equals 1 plus I, right? Or basically, we could have said it was 100 times 1.05, right? So she had what you might have done, kind of the mental math in your head would have been, okay, I've got $100. I'm going to earn 5% interest on that $100. So I'm going to get $5, 5% times 100, plus the 100 that I started with. So what I did was I said the 100 is the PV, the 0.05 is the I, right? Over here, the 100 is the PV. It's essentially times 1. I can pull doing some basic algebra. I can pull the PV out, right? And I'm left with 1 plus I. So, and you might have done this mental math, just saying, oh, it's 1.05. It's going to be 1.05 times, right? Which is why we're using 5% because it's easy. And so the future value at year 1 is 105. um, the future value at year 2 then is going to compound off of the current future value, right? So it's going to go, Katie's now got $105. Because it's compounding annually, it's going to compound again. So she's going to have um, the equivalent of 100. Well, she's going to have 105 times 1.05, right? Which is going to be, now I have to use my calculator. I'll get it. 1.05 times 105 times 1.05 gives me 110.25. So that is, so I had 105 in year, at the end of year 1. Year 2, I take the 105, bring it down, times 105, 1.05, I get 110.25. Year 3 now, I'm going to take that 110.25 times 1.05, and I'm going to get 115.76. Year 4, I bring that down, all right, 115.76 times 1.05, and I get 121.55. And then at the end of year 5, I take that 121.55 times 1.05 one last time, and I get 127.63. Okay. So I went from 100 to 105 to 110 to 115 to 121 to 127. So her final future value is 127.63. So the future value is 127.63. So she had an interest rate of 5%, end periods 5, a present value, an initial value of 100. The value at time 0 is 100. And she winds up with a future value of 127.63. Now, what happened up here? So I started at time 0. I don't know if you can see that. I started at year 0 with 100, right? Multiplied it by, in year 1, I took 100 times 1.05. Then I took that value, 105 times 1.05, times 1.05 times 1.05 times 1.05. So it's really like I did 100 times 1.05 times 1.05 times 1.05 times 1.05 times 1.05 for 5 times, right? Which gives me 127.63. That's effectively what I did. I started with 100, multiplied it by 1.05, got the 105. Took the 105 times 1.05, got the 110. Took the 110 times 1.05, got the 115, and so on down, right? So it's the same thing as multiplying 100 times 1.05 5 times. How could I represent this with one term?
Using an exponent
Right. So what would it be?
to the 5th power.
To the 5th power. Good. So it would be 100 times 1.05 to the 5th. Right? So what do we have here? We have the PV. Then we have 1 plus the interest rate, 1.05, right? Because the interest rate was 5%. We had our PV equals 100, and then we have an N of 5. Sorry, I want to do N of 5. So I have my N. This kind of shapes out here. That's my PV. So my formula for future value is the present value times 1 plus I raised to the N. Write it out again. PV times 1 plus I to the N. This is kind of the basis of finance. Everything basically flows from that. Okay, so if I want to calculate, for example, if Katie said, you know what, I'm going to take my $100 and I want to invest it instead for 5 years, I want to invest it for 50 years. I could do this, right? I could do this. I could go 1.05, 1.05, and eventually I would accumulate 50 of them, right? Multiply over and over and over and over and over again. But I've got a shortcut. I'm going to jot down and this is a habit I want you to get into. So Katie has a PV of 100. She's being offered an interest rate of 5%. She is now saying instead of an N of 5, that she's going to go with an N of 50. And she wants to know, what's my FV going to be? Well, I've got my formula here. FV equals PV times 1 plus I to the N. So I have my PV is 100. My I is 5%, so 1.05. And my N is 50. So to calculate this, I simply take my calculator, handy calculator, and I say, okay, make sure I've cleared my work. 1.05. I'm going to use the Y to the X button. That allows me to put in any exponent I want. To the 50th is 11.467 times, so that value here is 11.467 times 100. And I have Katie has, not me, $146.74, $1,146.74, 50 years from now, if she earned 5% per year over the lifetime of that loan. So this is a lump sum calculation. Again, Katie's making one deposit. It's the $100. She's putting it in for at an interest rate of 5%. Her N is 50, and we're calculating her future value. All right. So let's say that I'm going to invest $1,000 at 8% interest for 8 years. How much money would I have at the end? So after 8 years, 8% interest, 8 years, how much money will I have at the end? I want you to get in the habit. I know you're probably jumping straight into the formula. I want you to get into a habit of writing this little column. It's really important because it'll keep you from making mistakes. And I know it feels like an unnecessary step, but trust me on this one. Mostly because this is a super simple question. Okay, so we want to write out our inputs. PV is how much? 1,000. Good. I is, sorry, I can't hear you.
8%.
8%. Good. N is 8 years. The future value then would be, well, we would do FV equals 1,000 times 1 plus I would be 1.08 raised to the 8th power. Right? So we get 1.08 raised to the 8th power, 1.85 times 1,000. We get 1850.93. Everybody got that? Everybody with me? Okay. All right. Good. I'm going to, so that is future value, right, of a lump sum. The lump sum in this case was the 1,000. The interest, so then we want to have all these things that we're going to be paying attention to. The interest rate of 8%, and N is the number of periods, that's 8. The future value then becomes simply 1,850. I know most of you don't have your calculator yet, or probably don't, but I'm going to demonstrate real quick why this is a useful tool. I'm going to use my TVM functions on my calculator, which are right here. And notice I've got an N. I per Y is my interest rate per period. PV. PMT is payments. So that's when we get into doing annuities. We'll have a stream of payments. And then, I don't know, FV, my future value. So if I want to do this calculation, instead of using the formula, right, that we've worked out, I can simply punch in the values on my calculator. So I'm going to hit 1,000 and I'm going to make it negative is my PV. And I'm going to make it negative because I'm making an investment. The cash is flowing out of my wallet and into an investment. So PV is negative. I have an N of 8. I have an interest rate of 8. And notice something I'm doing on this calculator. When you use the TVM functions on the calculator, your interest rates are put in whole numbers. So an interest rate of 8% is put in as 8, not 0.08. If you do 0.08, you'll be entering in 800ths of a percent rather than 8%. So when you get your calculator, you need to pay attention to that. Now that said, I don't know how the graphing calculators work. So that's my interest rate per year. Then I just hit compute FV, and it gives me 1850.93. So that's pretty cool, I think. Now, again, you're probably saying, well, that's pretty easy. And like I said, this is a simple question, so it may seem like overkill to use a calculator when you could to use the TVM function on such a simple question. We're going to get more complicated. All right. I should have thought this one through, but let's change this real quick to, instead of 8% interest, it's 9% interest. Yeah, that should work. So 1,000 investment, 9% interest, 8 years, right? So how much would my future value be? 9% interest, 8 years. I'm going to demonstrate a principle here that's kind of fun. So I'm going to have, and we'll do this kind of quick, PV of 1,000, right? I is 9, N is 8, my FV is, so I'm going to have 8 years, 9% interest, initial investment is 1,000, compute FV, I get 1992.5. I didn't do this number before class, so I would have sought out something a little more precise. But there's a thing called the rule of 72. And the rule of 72 says you take 72 divided by the interest rate will give you the number of years for a lump sum to double. So it's an approximation, right? This is not precise, but it will give you roughly the number of years it takes for an investment to double. So the rule of 72, it says take 72, divide it by the interest rate, and it will tell you the number of years that it takes for a lump sum to double. So this is approximately double, right? 1,000 going to 1992. That's pretty, doubling 1,000 would be 2,000. 1992, that's pretty close for a very kind of rule of thumb kind of approach. So when you're calculating, when you're thinking about interest rates, this is one way to think about what's going to happen to your investments. How long would it take for my investment to double? Depends on the interest rate that you're earning. So if I was earning 10% interest, it would take roughly 7.2 years to double, right? If I was earning, I don't know, 72 divided by, say, 12%, it would take roughly 6 years to double, right? So 12%, 6 years, 10%, roughly, and these are rough estimates, right? 7.2%, 9%, 8 years, right? Say 6%, 12 years, so 6% would be 12 years, right, to double. So it's the interest rate has a dramatic effect on your future value, right? So it's really important to pay attention to interest rates, both kind of from an investment perspective, as well as like in your own personal life. So those of you that have credit cards, which you probably should have a credit card, it's a good idea to get a credit card at your age, because you can start building your credit score. And a credit score is based on the dollar value of the two primary things that go into a credit score are the dollar value of the accounts that you have available to you, so the amount of money you have available to you, and the number of years you've held the account without in good standing. So in the number of years that you have paid your credit off. So just having a credit card with a some allowance. So let's say you have $1,000 maximum, and having it for 2 years will give you a higher credit score than somebody who has had $1,000 credit card for 1 year, right? That's how they, as long as you pay your bills. If you don't pay your bills, then your credit score goes down. But it's important to pay attention to, if you've got a credit card, credit card interest rates tend to be really, really high, like 20%, right? So how long would it take for, if you bought something, if you like went down to Scorps and charged $100 in drinks, right? How long would it take, and you didn't make any payments against it, which you have to on a credit card, but if you didn't, how long would it take at 20% to double? Well, 72 divided by 20 gives us 3.6 years. And remember that the credit card is calculating the interest that you owe based on the current balance. So every time, and current credit cards typically compound on a monthly basis. So you're compounding on that balance every month. It's going to take, and that's why credit card debt grows so crazy. It's like, I don't feel like I charged all that much on my credit card, but now my credit card balance is crazy. Well, the reason it's crazy is because you have such a big interest rate, right? That the future value, right? The value of your loan is going to, the principal of your loan, the amount that the credit card has loaned you, is going to grow very, very fast based on compounding. Right.
So
Right,
for the rule of 72, it's not necessarily years, but like, and when it compounds. So like if it's monthly, it would be 3.6 periods rather than 3.6 years.
Yes, exactly. Right. So if you are paying, good point. If you are paying, if you have monthly compounding, and this is getting a little bit ahead of where we're at. If you have monthly compounding, let's say you have just to make my life easier, let's say your credit card has a APR, an annual percentage rate, and we'll circle back around to this again, has a annual percentage rate of 24%. The monthly, and it's compounded monthly. The interest rate you will actually face is going to be 24 divided by 12, or 2%. Let's say you spend $100 on your credit card, and you don't make any monthly payments for whatever reason. They allow you to not make any monthly payments. Your PV would be 100, right? And at the end of the year, what would the value of your bill be? What would you owe the credit card company? Well, what would your N be if you have monthly compounding?
12.
12, right? Because it's going to compound every month, not annually. The compounding is monthly. So you'll have a monthly interest rate of 2%, even though your annual quoted rate is 24%. Your monthly rate that they're going to apply to your current balance each month is going to be 2%. But you're going to have 12 compounding periods in a year, right? So 2% doesn't sound like very much, but let's do that real quick. Right, the future value is the present value. We borrowed $100 times 1.02, the monthly rate raised to the 12th power. So we take 1.02 raised to the 12th power, gives us 1.268 times 100, and our balance at the end of the year is 126.82, rather than 100. And what's interesting here is because of the monthly compounding, our APR was 24%. So if we had annual compounding, how much would your bill be at the end of the year? If you had annual compounding, how many periods would you have at the end of 1 year? One, right? You'd have one compounding period, but your interest would be 24%. So if you had annual compounding, you take out your 100, they do 1.24 raised to the 1, right? Because it's only one compounding period. That would be 100 times 1.24 would be 124. So you actually wind up paying them an extra $2.82 in interest because of the monthly compounding. So the frequency of compounding really matters. And this is chump change because it's 1 year on $100. But imagine if this was compounding over 5 years, right? So then you'd have how many? An N of 60, right? So you'd have 1.02 raised to the 60th power, which is going to be a much bigger number, right? And so as you have more frequent compounding and a longer period of investment, you're going to see a bigger and bigger divergence between less frequent compounding and more frequent compounding. And we're going to do a lot of this. And we'll get back to APRs and in a little later in this chapter. But I think the rule of 72 is kind of a fun one to kind of keep in your pocket. I can't remember if your text has this or not. I think it does. But it's kind of a clever little mental trick to be able to do to kind of estimate the effect of interest and the relationship between interest and years. Okay, so we've talked about the future value of a lump sum, right? We've been talking about taking some amount in the present and taking it into the future, right? We're now going to talk about calculating the present value, right? Or PV, present value. What does this mean? Well, at the beginning of class, and we're probably going to run out of time on this, but at the beginning of class, I said what if I borrowed $10 from Katie, but I told her I'd pay her back in a year? Is that $10 the same thing to Katie a year from now as it would be, say, tomorrow or later today? And the intuitive answer, hopefully you feel, is no. That's basically a gift to Bonica, right? If she gives me $10 today and I don't pay her back for a year, she's essentially giving it to me, which means that even at, say, let's say 12 months, right, times 0, I'm going to pay her $10 a year from now, so 12 months from now. And that's just really not worth very much to her. She'd much rather have it today. Why might she much rather have it today? Well, first of all, she could spend it today, right? So she could go to Scorps and get a beer instead of me going to Scorps and getting a beer, right? I guess those analogies are not particularly useful because probably you're not actually going to Scorps right now. But let's say you're going to take $10 and go pick up some dunks or something like that. So if Katie, what could Katie have done with her money if she didn't lend it to me? What could she have done with her money? And she could spend it, right? What else could she do?
Invest.
She could invest it, right? Now, $10 is not a lot of money to invest, but let's say it was $1,000, right? She could have invested it. So that means that over the course, and let's say she invested it, she just put it in, let's just say she put it in her savings account, and her savings account has monthly compounding. Over the course of a year, she would have had an N of 12, right? And let's say her bank account um, was paying, believe it or not, when I was your age, um, the interest rate on a savings account was about 5%. So you could earn five, yeah, roughly in college, yeah. It might have, I forget when they allowed it to change. For a long time, legally, they were required to pay 5%, um, which wasn't actually a favor to consumers, um, because you could have invested that money in um, a money market account, which we'll talk about later, and earned like 12%. So the banks were actually getting over. But let's say we jump back to the 80s, and you could get a five. Katie could have gotten 5% interest. We've already talked about if that's the APR is 5% and it's compounded monthly, then what would her actual monthly interest compounded be? Well, it'd be 5 divided by the number of periods, which is 12. So it's going to be a funky little 5 divided by 12 is 0.4167. It's probably 416666. So she could have gotten 5% a year or 0.41% per month. If her PV is $10, right? If she had had the $10 at the beginning of the period, she could have invested it. But instead, she's not investing it. She's lending it to me at 0 interest. So what is she losing out? Well, let's say she had invested it. Um, if she had invested it, she could have been earning interest. So instead, what we're going to say is this I, we're going to call the discount rate. The discount rate is the interest rate that we apply to lump sums or cash flows that we receive in the future. So the discount rate is the interest rate that we apply to cash flows, lump sums or annuities that we receive in the future. And we're trying to figure out what it would be worth to us to receive the full amount today instead of waiting, in this case, 12 months. So what I'm trying to do is find an equivalent amount of that $10 is worth to Katie today, instead of receiving it a year from now at an interest rate of 5%. So what I have now is I know what the future value is. I don't know what the present value is, right? So in this case, the present value is not 10. The present value is actually, I'm going to try to calculate. The future value in this case is going to be 10. And so what I want to try to figure out is how much is $10 a year from now worth to Katie if she could have invested the money at 5% interest compounded monthly. So in this case, using my formula, right, FV equals PV times 1 plus I to the n, I can rearrange this so that I'm solving for PV. And the way that I do that is I just divide both sides by 1 plus I to the n, right? That cancels over here, and I get PV equals FV divided by 1 plus I to the n. It's the same formula, right? And really, you could work with it. You could say, well, I know FV is 10. I don't know what PV is, and I could fill in, and then I could just solve for PV. This just kind of does the algebra to get the solving done in advance. And so Katie knows she's going to get $10 a year from now, plus we said that the interest rate is 0.4167%, so be careful here. That's actually 0.4167. So you got to translate that over, right? It's 0.4% per period. And the n is 12 because she's going to have 12 compounding periods. So now we can take that. What did I say? 5 divided by 12. That's my interest rate. Sorry, 0.05 divided by 12 plus 1 raised to the 12th. My denominator is 1.0512. I'm going to invert it times 10. And the PV is 9.51, roughly. So Katie would be indifferent between $10 a year from now or $9.51 today. And that's what we're trying to calculate when we're doing present value calculations, okay, is we're trying to calculate what is a cash flow in the future worth to us today. All right, so we're out of time, so we'll pick up here on Thursday, and we'll keep going. We'll do a little more with PV because I know the FV is pretty intuitive, right? Calculating future value is pretty intuitive. It's something you probably do on a pretty regular basis, but thinking about present value is a little bit like, I don't know what happened there. So just to remember, what it really is you're trying to say is, what's the value to me of something happening in the future? The value of $100 a year from now is not the same thing as if somebody said, I will give you $100 today. Right? Okay, so I will see you, I think all of you, well, except for Octavia, I'll see the rest of you this afternoon for Econ. Have a great rest of the day. I'll hang on here. I'm going to stop